Hi, it's Emily Pritt here with Ken Reed, and this is our last webinar for 2024. So we've got something unique to talk about, and I'm going to let you kind of pick up with the topic and why it's important, why we're even going to talk about it today.
Certainly, yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about corrective actions. And what we found is a lot of companies do a really good job of working through their investigation process. So they'll do a great job collecting information. They'll use snap charts for that, and then doing the root cause analysis on the causal factors. That all works well. And then they get the root causes, and it seems like sometimes they just fall down on the corrective actions. You know, how they're going to fix things.
Guilty.
we see it quite frequently, and they're really trying to do the right thing. They're putting this much effort into finding the problems, finding the root causes, and then they just kind of fall back on, I just say, kind of crummy corrective actions, you know, weak corrective actions.
Right.
So what we found is that we have these most common and unfortunately least effective types of corrective actions that are out there. So first of all, it's always good to kind of understand, why does that happen in the first place? You know, why do companies put so much effort into investigating and then not fix things properly? Yeah. And a lot of times it's that you know, faster, better, cheaper thing. You know, you pick two of the three, and a lot of these kinds of corrective actions that they pick are easy. They don't cost a lot of money. We can do them pretty quickly and get them out of the way. You know, check them off our list of things to do. So that's why companies, I think, fall back on these because they're simple, but they don't really think about, is this going to fix our problems? Is this really going to come up with some really good corrective actions that are going to eliminate the issues that we found and prevent them from happening again? So we've really found that there's kind of like 3 different types of corrective actions that companies do. And we've done this kind of in surveys during our classes. You know, I'll ask everybody in the class to tell me if they could take their corrective action lists, their corrective action program, and divide the corrective actions into 3 buckets of corrective actions. Okay. What are the most common? And within 15 seconds, the class will tell me what those 3 buckets are.
Training?
Training's one. Yep, that's one. Another one that they pop up to is procedures. Okay.
Now we're going to rewrite or adjust the procedure.
Yep. Do something with a procedure, put a new one in place, make it longer, do something with it. And the last one is discipline. Okay. So those are the 3.
We got to fire somebody.
Somebody's
losing their job. Yep.
Discipline, some kind of discipline. Okay. Sometimes it's even something as simple as counsel the employee on whatever. That's a form of discipline, really. So we'll talk about those in a little more detail, but those are the 3 buckets. That's where most companies seem to end up when they write their corrective actions, into those categories of corrective actions.
So you're not saying that these are not effective or not the right thing to do. The goal here is to look beyond just those simple 3 little buckets, those quick fixes, for something a little more long-lasting.
Exactly. Right? That's a really good way of putting that. It's so I'm a nuclear-trained guy, and you're not going to hear a nuke ever tell you that training's bad or procedures are bad, right? We're not going to tell you that. And I was in the Navy, so discipline, obviously, is something that's there, right? So I'm not saying that those are corrective actions you should never consider. That's not the intent. However, as a company, you should think to yourself, are these effective corrective actions? Are they actually going to fix things? And when you think about procedures and training, specifically, I'm going to concentrate on those for just a second. I like a company, when they're thinking about those corrective actions, to consider all the ways that those corrective actions can fail. Okay. So let's talk about procedures, for example. All right. So we're going to write a new procedure. So the guy made a mistake over here. We're going to update the procedure to eliminate that mistake.
Okay. Well, what if he doesn't use the procedure?
So think of all
He can't find the procedure, or if he's got an older version, they didn't, make it clear that it's been revised. They didn't tell everybody that the procedures changed. That was, I can see where that
So all of what you just mentioned are all different human errors that can occur with a procedure. It can cause a procedure not to work properly. It could be a bad procedure, it could be interpreted wrong, it could be not available, like you just said.
Language barrier.
Language barrier.
Assuming it's for another piece of machinery.
The wrong procedure, right?
Right.
Yep.
There could be an update to the, the system that runs on some kind of software that could affect the procedure.
That's right. We had the wrong revision.
The module's
because
different.
all
Okay.
kinds of human errors that go into procedure usage. Right.
Okay.
And everything you just mentioned are great examples of all of the errors that are involved in a procedure problem. So again, I don't want to say don't have good procedures. That's not at all what I'm saying. I am saying, though, that if you have a high risk, frequent kind of evolution that you're doing, you don't want to depend on the procedure to be the only safeguard. Because I will guarantee that procedure will fail at some point in time. It's going to. I can put a paycheck on it that at some point in the next however many years, that procedure will fail. In fact, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe not years.
Okay.
So is that okay?
No.
For high risk kind of things, high consequence, it is not okay. For simple stuff, stuff that low consequence, low risk things, okay, the human will screw it up every now and then. Okay, are we okay with that? Maybe. Maybe for simple stuff we're okay with that, and a procedure is perfectly okay as your corrective action. But for high consequence, high risk stuff, you can't depend on the procedure. There's too many human errors. And think about training as another option, another example. So in order for training to work, think of all the human errors that can involve. First of all, you have to have a good training. You have to have a good trainer. You have to have the student attend the training. He's got to listen to the training. He's got to understand the training. When he goes out to the field, he has to remember the training. And then he has to do what the actual training said to do.
Yeah.
I mean, think of all the opportunities for a human.
And there's distractions while you're in the training, and
Right.
there's the retention issues that are just, they happen. It happens
just
to all of
happens.
us.
It just
So
happens.
even sitting there being as attentive as possible, you're not going to retain 100%.
That's right.
And then you leave that training environment, and then maybe it's weeks later, and you've got to what am I supposed
What
to
was
do?
that? Did I have training on that? You ought to see me sometimes in the office trying to remember. I just talked to somebody yesterday about this, and I have no clue what that was about. I
Right.
can't remember.
And then there's pressures of I'm trying to meet a deadline.
Right.
Or
We got to get it done by the end of the day today. Oh, I've got these
Yeah.
other things. What that training say? I don't remember.
cognitive load is a bunch.
That's right.
Okay.
So again, training is, you're not going to hear me ever say don't train your people, but you have to recognize the limitations of training. And it is a very weak corrective action. On our safeguard hierarchy, training is the lowest reliability corrective action, safeguard. It's a very weak safeguard. So again, I'm not saying don't train people, but recognize it is going to fail.
Yeah.
So if it's okay to fail 5% of the time, 10% of the time, 2% of the time, if we're okay with that, well then training is a perfectly okay corrective action. But again, for high risk, high consequence problems, you can't depend on training to be your only safeguard. So for these kind of issues with training and procedures, I find these are really good additional safeguards that you put in place.
Yeah.
Right? I would rather you start at the top of that safeguard hierarchy that we talk about in our courses, where you remove the hazard, you remove the target. Those are much more effective. But in addition to those, I do training and put some good procedures in place. But just because it's easy and quick to do doesn't necessarily mean it's a good corrective action to do. So procedures and training, again, do them, but recognize the limitations that go along with those. Discipline is one I haven't really talked a whole lot about. Again, a military guy, discipline's important, and I don't think that's just a military thing, but it's obviously stressed a little more in the military. But any company, you've got to have discipline.
Right. It's the consequences of the actions.
That's
it's
right.
trying to reinforce, hopefully, positive behavior from a negative action.
That's right. That's right. Discipline is normally considered to be a negative type of corrective action. And again, not saying that you don't ever want to do those, but discipline isn't always the most effective way of fixing things.
And discipline can also kind of fall in there with training. Discipline is a type of training.
It is. It is. I'll tell you. So we used to, as I think back on my Navy career, we used to combine discipline, procedures, and training all in one. So for the guy that screwed up, we would make him give the training.
Ah.
So we kind of made the training his discipline.
But it yeah. You didn't get it this time. You're gonna have to go tell everybody, and we're gonna get you if you don't get it right.
Yeah, and as I think back on it, I'm thinking, so
you're reinforcing if he doesn't get it right, then he's just, and then it's like this, like the game of telephone where so now he's just told a room full of people an improper way.
Probably the guy who screwed up is not the right guy to train the rest of your team, right? So as I look back on that, we did that all the time. The guy that screwed up gave the training. And it sounded good at the time, but looking back on it, what a terrible way to either do discipline or training, either one separately. But when you combine them like that, it's terrible. So again, don't get me wrong, you need discipline.
We've heard you, yeah.
Right?
So those 3 buckets, they're still on the table.
They're still there.
Yep.
You just have to recognize the limitations.
Gotcha.
And a lot of times with the discipline piece, we also find that the discipline is being given to somebody who already knows the answer. So if the guy screws something up and we say, hey, I'm counseling you on the importance of not doing that again. Well, if the guy just lost a finger, I'm thinking that counseling isn't necessarily that effective.
Yeah,
he already knows.
He knows.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and the same with training. I'm going to train these guys on how not to make this mistake. Well, that guy already knows, right? He's not going to make that mistake again. It's the others and getting more effective results out of your corrective actions. They're just not the most effective way to go. So these are good layers of defense that you want to put in place.
Okay.
But recognizing at the same time that there's limitations to how well they work on their own is really what you want to look at.
So there's a corrective action helper guide.
That's right.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
But this is a tool that's useful to make sure we're finding better corrective actions.
Yeah.
Smarter corrective actions.
Smarter corrective actions, for example. Yeah, we have several tools that we offer to help you get beyond just these 3 buckets of corrective actions. The corrective action helper, that guide is a great. It's really good for me because I am not the most creative guy, so I easily fall back on training, procedures, and discipline. It's
ingrained in you.
It is. It's ingrained. It's just what I do. So that corrective action helper is a great tool, both the hard copy and in the software, to give me some guidance, some ideas of things to do.
What's an example? Let's talk about something that's, maybe that first instinct falls in one of the 3 buckets, and then something you might find in the corrective action helper guide.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say I'll use this as an example. It may not have happened exactly like I'm saying it here, but this would be a kind of
All
an example.
names have been removed.
That's right. I need to genericize this a little bit if that's a word. If somebody trips off the wrong piece of equipment.
Okay.
So we had an emergency drill in place, and somebody tripped off the wrong piece of equipment. The 2 pieces of equipment, there's one here and there's one here. And he was supposed to trip this one off. There's a lever down here, and he tripped this one off instead.
Okay.
And if you look at the 2 pieces of equipment, they're identical. They look identical to each other. One's on the left side of the room, and the one's on the right side of the room. And he was supposed to trip the left side one, but he was facing the other direction and grabbed the wrong one.
So it sounds like a labels thing.
So there's now we can take a look at. So I could write the procedure to say verify you are tripping the correct piece of equipment.
How are you going to verify?
That's a pretty crappy procedure.
Yeah.
So procedure is not going to be a very good answer here. I could train him, but when I asked him, I said, hey, did you know you're supposed to trip off the port piece of equipment? He says, oh yeah, I knew that. Well, then training's useless. He already knew the answer. He just grabbed the wrong one. So training and procedures are not very helpful here. I could yell at him, hey, be careful next time. Make sure you trip off the port piece of equipment, not the starboard. And he said, oh, okay. Well, he already knows that. So discipline's useless. That's not a very helpful corrective action. So you go to the corrective action helper, and how do I fix a problem where two pieces of equipment that look close to each other but are different? What can I do about those? And labeling is an example where I could put an actual label, port starboard, or I could color code it. Okay, everything on one side is green and everything on the other side is red, so I have port and starboard set up.
But there's some people who have color issues.
So there's color issues, so you have to keep that in mind.
Different colors, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah.
You could. So those are the kinds of things that the corrective action helper will start asking you to look beyond just training procedures and discipline, because those are not going to help this person who knows the answer, who just made a simple error in grabbing the wrong piece of equipment.
I think another problem might be is people go so creative that they're like, oh, well, there's levers or levers, whatever you call them. Let's put a different style of handle, and then it's like, well, first we have to also look at how many times has this error happened? Is it worth it? Does it make sense? Are we in a high risk, but do we need to redesign something?
So, boy, that's a great point. Sometimes safety people, no offense, safety people, but sometimes safety people, especially, this is where I see it the most, come up with this wonderful corrective action that just doesn't make economic sense. I could redesign and cut out all the piping and move my valves so that they're less likely to be operated improperly. Nobody's going to do that. It's too expensive. It's probably, like you said, it doesn't happen very often. It's low risk. While it sounds good, it just doesn't make economic sense to do that. So in those cases, you can fall back on the lower level type corrective actions. Maybe something as simple as a label makes more sense for something like that, as opposed to ripping all the handles off things and putting special handles on, right?
Yeah.
It may not make sense to do that. So yeah, that's something in our smarter corrective actions. Does it make economic sense? Does this make sense to do this corrective action? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Safety people are the ones I see all the time. It's like, well, it's safety. We just have to do that. And it's like, well, no, we don't have to do that. We can sometimes live with a less robust corrective action for low consequence, low risk kind of areas. So that's okay, and that's something you should consider when you write a corrective action. So yeah, that's a good point. It's while we can always put really, really expensive corrective actions in place, it doesn't always make sense to do that.
Yeah.
So
I could see how you could really go down the rabbit hole of, well, what if somebody trips over this? Or what if, because of the grease in the glove and the handle's slippery, and then, like you could just go like way off the deep end.
And
with,
especially if you start going into like generic causes, then, oh, well, this one over here was a problem, and these two are problems. Maybe I need to look at all of the handles in my entire plant.
Oh, my goodness.
Well,
yeah.
At some point you just got to say to yourself, I'm pretty satisfied with the corrective actions we put in place. I've looked at my risk matrix. I've recognized where it falls on there, and this type of corrective action makes sense for where we are in that risk matrix. And for the high risk stuff, it probably makes sense to spend some money. Make sure it's done properly. Make sure that it can't happen again. High risk, high consequence stuff. For the lower stuff, and you can live with possible error, you might just want to put layers of less robust kind of corrective actions.
So you mentioned something I think that's also important when we're implementing these corrective actions, and there's some knowledge that maybe we don't have as human factors experts and things like that. So like you have this issue with the levers. At what point do you stop and say this is isolated? Versus how do you know when you need to go talk to another department or another to see if the problem is being replicated? Where do you begin to not delve in too much time into something that might only be, like, how do you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's not an easy answer to that. So it's a great question, though. First of all, hopefully the company has a good lessons learned program where you can go check to see have we had this problem before? Is this an area that we've is this a problem we've never seen and it's a one-time in 20 years at our company? Or is this just something that's happened at this plant today we haven't seen before, but our other 30 plants, it's happened there in the past year or two.
So this lessons learned program, that's something that the company implements, that it's something that uh, upper management can access, that they disseminate down to the other departments, something where at least key personnel have access to know where these things are occurring.
That's right. It's each company is going to implement this differently, so there's not a black and white, right and wrong way to do it.
Of course.
But yeah, after from where I came from in the Navy, when we had an incident happen, something bad happened, the first thing that I did, well, one of the first things I did is go back and look at our old incident reports. Have we ever seen this before? And we have access to other facilities' incident reports and look at those. And I'll be honest, this was a fairly manual process. We didn't have a good electronic. I'm going to search for wrong lever pulled and search for that.
Yeah,
there was no
hope,
way to
right?
do that, and so it was a manual search that you have to do. Now that was 20 years ago. Nowadays, much better systems out there. You got AI out there that can help you find these things if you've got that implemented at your company. So there's a lot of tools that can help you look for these kind of issues.
That's great, yeah, because I think a lot of times it's the lack of communication that can also contribute to a lot of these issues that people are having as well.
That's
so,
right. And then that forces you not, if you don't recognize that this is a more common problem than you thought it was, you start putting these crappy corrective actions in place. You know, you think, training's fine. We've never seen this before. Yeah. Well, maybe it's happened 30 times in the past year and you didn't know it.
Yeah, and so you might have just nominated yourself to be that person to say, we're going to start this program and start tracking.
Yeah.
That's another issue of like how big or how small, but it's starting with numbers. Like if this has already happened 4 times, we got to start somewhere.
Right.
And then
right.
we're finding patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of new tools are available to people in your corrective action programs to search to see if we've seen this issue in the past. And I know a lot of companies now have almost an automated risk matrix where they can I don't want to say it does it for them, but it gives them guidance on when you see a type of problem, where does this fall on the risk matrix? So there's lots of tools that are available out there now to help you understand the kinds of problems that you're looking at.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, when you have the chance, you should be looking at more robust corrective actions, the stronger, more effective corrective actions. And me personally, I feel that training, procedures, and discipline should be kind of your, I don't want to say your last resort, but should be almost always used in conjunction with a more robust corrective action if you have that opportunity. That prevents you from just seeing this happen again.
There's an idiom about not putting all your eggs in one basket. It's like, don't put all your corrective actions in
These
3
three
buckets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
So we talked about the Corrective Action Helper Guide, the book.
Yep.
And it's part of the Taproot system. It's not something you'd use standalone. You couldn't just go buy the book and expect to have it work with any kind of root cause analysis system.
Right. It's based on our root causes. So it's if you really have to use it in conjunction with the Taproot system. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
But what it does is also once we go through the snap chart, like we said at the beginning, and most people kind of get through, there's that momentum of, all right, I got my root causes, now what?
Yep.
The Corrective Action Helper Guide is going to propel those corrective actions into deeper, more creative, more effective corrective actions than falling on the typical, the things that we're kind of used to.
It's just part of the flow. Once you get your Taproot flow going of gathering data, doing root cause analysis, put corrective actions in place. And that whole flow, the Corrective Action Helper, is part of that flow. It's just, instead of trying to sit down and sit in a room with a bunch of smart people who are going to come up with good corrective actions, while that sounds wonderful, if all those smart people are really training people, you're going to come up with a bunch of training corrective actions. So there are times when getting a bunch of people in a room together and just saying, what do you think is the problem here, and what do you think the corrective actions are going to be? You're
going to get so many different answers. It's like getting pulled.
Yeah, and you don't know if you got the right answers.
Yeah.
And if all of you have been used to doing these 3 buckets, then that's the same corrective actions you've always done. So the Corrective Action Helper, and actually the whole Taproot system, forces you to look at things that your team would not have thought of on their own.
And so the lens of that system, it's not just from the lens of safety and not just the lens of quality. It pulls all of it together, and then it's easy to say, well, okay, well, what makes the most sense?
That's right. It's
Yeah.
I keep harping on this because for some reason this doesn't seem to click with people when I hear them talk about it. But I mean, the baseline of Taproot is human performance. It is where Taproot was developed, 4 decades ago when Taproot was put together. It's based on human performance research. So any place you have humans, Taproot will work. And it's not just, like you said, for safety or quality or equipment. Yeah. It's any place that humans are involved. So.
And if humans are not involved, we have Equifactor. That's for the machines.
That's the equipment piece of it, right? That's right. So that's always available there to help you with equipment troubleshooting, which, amazingly enough, oftentimes feeds right back into human performance again.
Right, because we need both, man and machine.
That's right. That's right. So.
Yeah, well,
Cool.
excellent. Awesome. So hopefully you found some insights into effective corrective actions. I'll put a link below where you can see on our store the Corrective Action Helper Guide. Of course, it's part of the robust Taproot system. So if you haven't had any training in Taproot, we encourage you to get into a 2-day course to start, and you'll learn all about the Taproot system and how it can help you find better root cause analysis, investigations, and the whole thing. So thanks again, Ken.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. We'll see you again next time.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.